Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon also, and good evening for all of you. Welcome to the third series of our monthly webinar series, Open Science from UNESCO, Recommendations to Reality in Asia and the Pacific. Welcome, and my name is Fitri. I will be your moderator for the next 1 hour and 30 minutes in the next discussions. And before we start, I would like to walk you through the housekeeping notes and also the overview of our projects behind this webinars. With us today, we will have two distinguished speakers. And before we go that, let me share my screen. So please rename yourselves with your full name if possible, and also with your affiliations and country. And keep your microphone muted when you are not speaking. Also use the chat box for any questions and comments. And you please raise hand in the Zoom if you want to take the floor during the discussions. And these sessions will be recorded for documentations, and we will send out all of the recording together with the invitations of the next sessions. So the sessions today is the third sessions under the big project called the Capacity Building for Open Science in Asia Pacific, Advancing Collaborative Researcher for Sustainable Development, where we started since October last year's, the first and the second sessions, and we will have until September 2026. And for these sessions, from openness to impact, we will discuss three key messages, which is the overview of open science and open access status in our region in Asia Pacific, and also the perspectives of open science from the researcher's point of view, and also the principles and practices and other examples of open access publishing models. And then we will see the evidence of scientific and economic impacts of open science alongside the equity considerations are related to costs, infrastructures, and also participation. And then after that, we will also identify the challenges in research evaluations and metrics, and how tools such as open science indicators can support a more transparent and responsible assessment. And before that, this project itself has three main objectives. The main objective is to raise the awareness of in the region, and also to train the skills of researchers, especially the young early career researchers, and to implement open science principles in hands-on setting through collaborative and also interdisciplinary research, and also share the results openly and address the shared challenge in the regions. But while you are doing this research, is to implement the UNESCO recommendations on open science, where these recommendations is the first international standard setting, which have four pillars, not only open access, but we also have the open scientific knowledge, open science infrastructures, open engagement of societal actors, and open dialogue with knowledge systems. And also this recommendations of open science, it promotes the collaborations and information sharing between the different stakeholders, and also engage wider society, and also ensures the multilingual scientific knowledge is open, accessible, and reusable for all. And we will hear more during the discussions about the values, principles, and also areas of actions of open science. But you can see this is like the overviews that we can see from these recommendations, that open science has its core values, its principles in the implementations and areas of actions that's recommended within the recommendations. Uh, Back to the project itself, like I mentioned earlier, we have three main activities and main objectives. The first one is to raising the awareness on what is open science and identify its potentials and requirements to implement open science. And we will learn on how to practice it from within our regions, and also we will learn as well from other regions. From our speakers that we have today, we will learn in the context of Asia Pacific, but we will also have the examples of other countries and other regions. And then for the next steps, we will have like implementations steps, like together with the young researchers, early career researchers. They will have the collaborative research projects together and implement what we have in previous part. This is the first part of our project, which mainly this is part of this monthly webinars and the awareness raising activity. And also we have the overview, we have the activity 2 and activity 3 that will be implemented in the second and the third year. And I would like to give you the overview of the participants that we have today. We have participants from researchers and academia. We have university lecturers. We have the government's policy makers, students, university students. We also have librarians, data archive managers, and we have the private sector's industry, but only little numbers. And we asked them how familiar you are with open science. We have balanced answers. 22% with the answers I don't know much about open science, and the others are familiar with open science but not involved in its practices, and 28% is actively promoting open science, and 22% is practicing open science. For the country-wise, we have larger participations from our regions, from Asia and the Pacifics, and also out of the Asia Pacifics. And on the next, during the discussions, we would like to also invite you to participate, to contribute your response, to share with us the challenge, the lesson learned through Mentimeter. You can scan the QR now. The Menti will be opened and we will present the Menti during the discussions. And as I mentioned earlier, we have two distinguished speakers with us today. We have Professor Vincent Larivière. Hopefully it's correct that I pronounce your name. And also we have Miss Elaine Tham. And so Professor Vincent is the professor from University of Montreal. And he is a UNESCO chair of Open Science, and he was a member of the committee that guided the development of UNESCO Open Science recommendations. And thank you so much for participating in this webinars, even though it's quite late for you from Montreal, and welcome. And also we have Miss Elaine Tham. She is Regional Director for Publishing Development in Asia, Public Library of Science, or PLOS, where PLOS is a nonprofit organizations and publishers that promotes open science by making scientific research freely available through its peer-reviewed open access journals. We will go directly to the discussions, and the first questions I would like to address to Vincent to start this discussions for these sessions. How could you explain open science specifically in comparison with the conventional science system, and how do you see the potentials of open science, especially in our regions in Asia Pacific? Vincent, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here. Indeed, it's a bit late for me, so I may be a bit tired at some point. It's my third presentation today, so It's been a long day. So
Thank
I
you so
prepared a
much.
few slides to answer the question. And so some of them are, well, as you'll see, some of them are taken from actually the UNESCO website, but this one is not. So historically, science is mostly a closed activity. Science is made by an elite of people who have not necessarily made the knowledge available to everyone. So the first major barrier is the barrier to access to literature. Historically, journals are printed, and only those who can pay manage to get the subscription. And it's also like that in the early days of the internet, where basically only subscribers were able to have access to the literature. Open science aims at making the knowledge itself, the papers, more open. The second historical difference, let's say, is access to research data. So traditionally, in a closed scientific environment, data is only available to the research teams. The research team will compile data on nature, on society, and then only the team will have access to the data. In an open science world, everyone would get access to the data, which would make science more reproducible, more transparent, increase basically the confidence that we have in the knowledge. I'll get back to research data later because it's a bit more complex to make data open than to make scientific papers open. Um, there's also entry barrier in those who can participate into science. So as I said, science is basically done by an elite group of people, and citizens have very little participation in that. So in an open science universe, we would try to have um, basically society either contributing in some way to maybe data collection or a couple of aspects of scientific activity, as well as participating into basically the choice of research problems on which scientists could work. Um, Fourth point, science historically is not so diverse. Science is mostly, or at least in the recent years, written in English. Again, open science tries to diversify the scientific community, those who can participate, but also the ways in which science is being disseminated. And the fifth one, and this is not trivial, research evaluation over the last couple of decades is done through black boxes, indicators like the journal impact factors that are not necessarily so transparent. Things have improved a bit, but they are not so transparent. And the access to the data for research evaluation is also based on subscription. So all of those shows that science is trying to shift from, let's say, a closed activity to something that is a bit more open and that is more, in a way, that is better. Open science tries to make science better. So there are several facets to open science. This is a more global set of facets than those that are covered by UNESCO. We're talking about open notebooks, so all of the lab works and the lab notes that are being taken by scientists would be open. Having also open data. Again, I've mentioned that earlier. Open peer review, where basically the content, and there's kind of two ways we can see open review. It can mean either or having the content of the reviews freely available online so that you can see with the published manuscripts what reviewers, sorry, have said about it. But it also means removing anonymity from the peer review process, which is a bit of a complex issue. I think there's not so much to gain from removing anonymity, but there's definitely something to gain from providing the content of the review. Uh, at the heart of that is, of course, open access. Then we also have open source softwares, so having basically different tools that the community can use that are based on open code and that are freely available. And sorry, scientific social networks, which we can debate if they're part of open science, citizen science, which I mentioned earlier, with having a greater participation of society, and open educational resources, which is a crucial element. So if we consider the definition of UNESCO, basically those are the five global categories that fit in there. I won't go into the details of that, but I want to mention the values and principles. Those were in the slides that were presented earlier, but I think it's worth saying a couple of things on them. So open science really tries to improve the quality of the research that we are doing. It really tries to make science better and having a higher integrity through being more transparent. Uh, it also really follows principles of equality and equity and fairness, where basically there's no biases that exist in the system. We know that science is full of biases. There have been hundreds of papers proving gender bias, linguistic biases that exist, which means that not everyone can contribute to science to the same level, and not all knowledge is considered of the same value. And so there's a lot of work to be done in that area, and open science kind of strives to make that. There's definitely collective benefits. Science is a public good; it belongs to all of humanity, and open science tries to make that work. And the fourth one is actually very similar, I believe, to the third one about equity and fairness. But again, being more inclusive means that science is going to be better. There's quite a lot of advantages to open science, an increase in scientific collaboration, sharing of information for the benefit of science and society. The multilingual component is crucial, and the evaluation aspect is very, very important. So for the last part of my answer, I want to focus on one of these facets of open science, which is open access, which is the one on which we basically have the most information, that where we've had the most research in the last couple of, well, basically in the last two decades. So I want to go back 30 years, where when the internet started, there were a lot of people who were believing that it would actually be the end of scientific journals and mostly the end of journals that are owned by for-profit corporations. People thought that it would be finally an era of open science and of free available to knowledge. So the magazine, the economic magazine Forbes, wrote a very long article that basically says that Elsevier will be the first victim of the internet. The web was created by academics to share scientific information. Now we can do that for free on the web. Why would we need scientific journals? And unfortunately, what happened is that we, as a scientific community, we did not have infrastructure to disseminate papers online, but the for-profit publishers had already started doing that. So what happened was that instead of having more diversity in the ownership of the journal, it actually consolidated. So the small publishers, the society publishers, the university publishers, they all got purchased and eaten by the big publishers. And in turn, those big publishers increased their control over the scientific papers published at the world level. And so that's kind of one could say a failure of the internet and of the digital age. Uh, Instead of making things more democratic, it actually increased control. It increased concentration. Um, and of course, with a very high profit margin, I won't go into the details of that, but that's something that's very important. Uh, but the other thing that I want to say is that, so this is 30 years ago. Things have changed quite a lot since then. And later today, later in my talk, in the other question that I will answer, I will talk about the importance of infrastructures because we need infrastructure to be able to gain back control over scholarly publishing. But earlier today, I compiled this figure, which basically shows for every country in the world the proportion of papers that are written in open access. The world average for 2005 is actually quite high at almost 64%. So again, almost two-thirds of papers, according to OpenAlex, the inclusive database. So that's not based on the Web of Science or Scopus. It's really based on a database that tries to index everything that is being published. So close to two-thirds of everything that is being published is available in open access. And look at the huge differences across parts of the world. Latin America has very, very, very high open access rates. And it's mostly due to the fact that they have developed their own infrastructure, um, which in Brazil is called Cielo, Latindex, Redalic. Those are all infrastructures that are owned by the community. They're not owned by corporations. Canada and the US have much lower open access rates than Latin America. In Europe, important differences, a bit lower for France, but higher for other parts of Europe. And now moving to the Asia Pacific region, I think it's very interesting because we see that it's a land of huge contrasts where places like India and China have relatively low open access rates compared with other parts of the region. And I want to mention Indonesia because we have really seen a growth of papers coming from Indonesia, mostly because of the massification of the use of the open journal system from PKP, from the Public Knowledge Project, which I think there's at least 10,000 journals from Indonesia that are using it, but it may be closer to 25. I don't remember the number, but a very, very high number of journals from Indonesia using the software, which basically shows the empowerment that is feasible, that national scientific communities in Asia Pacific can develop their journal ecosystem and disseminate in open access for everyone to look at the world level. Um, Last thing I want to say, and this is a bit of a how can I say that a my current evaluation of those first 30 years of open science and open access uh, is that of a it's a contrasted let's say, bulletin that we have, or a contrasted evaluation. So open access, yes, contributed to having more research that is freely available, but it also increased the control of for-profit publishers on the system, which is an adverse effect. We could say that APCs are out of control with journals that, like Nature, are asking for almost 13,000 US dollars to publish. We have clearly predatory journals that are out there. Um, Most of the research evaluation remains done on private platforms. It's not transparent and non-reproducible. So there's a couple of things that for the next 30 years, and that will be the second part of my talk in a couple of minutes. Uh, that so far in some aspects it's a bit of a broken promise or an incomplete promise. We need to do better. And I think that the Asia Pacific region is probably part of the solution as well as Latin America. So I'll conclude by saying that many of the issues related to open science are from rich countries. They've emerged from that, and now we need to fight those. And the answer probably lies outside North America and Europe. So voila. Thank you very much, and happy to discuss more with everyone.
Thank you so much, Song Song. Sends really great explanations, and I got like new lens and perspective on our regions, seeing the huge contrast not only in other areas and sectors, but also in open access. We have that kind of disparities.
Mhm.
And now we go to the next questions. I would like to ask Elaine, building from that explanation and also perspective from Fansong, what does open science mean in today's scholarly publishing landscapes, and what are the main open access models and their implications? Maybe Elaine, you can explain more based on your experience.
Thanks a lot, Fitri. And also, I wanted to thank UNESCO Jakarta for the kind invitation for me to speak today. I think it's both a pleasure and an honor for us to contribute to today's topic, but also to support this, I think, very meaningful project from UNESCO. So I'm gonna share my screen. Is this okay? Okay. So I want to start with some background. So PLOS is a nonprofit mission-driven organization, and that mission is to drive open science forward with meaningful and measurable change in research publishing, policy, as well as practice. And we believe that being open is about more than just being able to read or share an article. It's also about providing the right context, the right tools, and the right resources to collaborate and make science better. So we publish a portfolio of journals, a small portfolio, and one of our main approaches to enabling open science is by using our journals as vehicles to effectively drive open science practices in that scholarly communication process. So, open science, as Vincent has mentioned, has many parts, some of which researchers may not yet be, fully familiar with, and especially since I think a lot of these practices are still, in a way, developing and still evolving as well. But I think what publishers like PLOS can do is to guide and encourage researchers by building these best practices into our journal policies, and also by offering simple, practical ways for them to try them out, so that as they move through that publishing process, we can support them step by step. And in so making open science feel maybe a bit more accessible and approachable and hopefully easier to adopt. So from a publishing perspective, we tend to think about open science in three main areas, and each of these play an important role, we think, in strengthening that scholarly record. So first, we might look at the additional elements that can be built into that publishing process. So things like ORCID, credit, preprints, and open peer review, which Vincent mentioned. So these tools can help make that research process more transparent. It can help readers understand, who did what, how the research has evolved, how it was evaluated. So they don't change, the research itself, but they can enrich that story around it, giving credit where it's due, creating more accountability, and also helping others to follow the development of the work more clearly. Secondly, we encourage researchers to share the building blocks of their research. So the data, the code, the methods, the protocols, and so on. And these, I think, are the materials that will really allow others to test, to verify, and to build upon that work. So when these type of elements are openly shared, the trust increases, the transparency improves, and the reproducibility becomes more possible. So it's not just about opening, the final result being the paper itself, but then about opening that pathway that led to it, which is what helps move science forward, a bit more reliably. And thirdly, we also want to address publication bias. So Vincent mentioned a few existing biases in the system, but what we try to counter is publication bias, which in this sense is the tendency to publish only positive or statistically significant results more often than the results that don't find an effect. And to counter that, we support things like pre-registration, more inclusive journals, and the publication of null and negative, or even sometimes inconclusive results, because these type of practices help to ensure the scientific record to reflect all outcomes, not just the positive ones. And that makes the scientific literature more accurate. And it also gives the meta-analysis, a fairer foundation and prevents wasted effort from repeating studies that might unknowingly follow a dead end. So in this next slide, I wanted to show the kind of the full research and publication journey and the different types of open science practices that can fit in at the different stages. So even beginning at the planning phase with your research, thinking about things like pre-registration and sharing protocols, and then, moving to the submission stage and thinking about sharing your preprints, your contributor identification, and, again, sharing your negative results. During the peer review and publication stages, more options will then open up, you know, thinking about transparent and open peer review, open access. And at these stages, researchers can also choose to make their work more open by sharing their data, their code, their methods in repositories. And the point here is that open science is not one single step. It's a series of choices that researchers can make to make their research work more transparent and collaborative and, hopefully ultimately more impactful. So we've talked about the open science practices, more broadly, but now I want to zoom in a little bit on one of the more central pieces of that ecosystem, which is open access publishing. And in the next few slides, I want to walk us through a range of models currently within open access, because I think it can all be a little bit confusing. And a part of the reason, again, is that that landscape is in a way still evolving. But basically, you'll see that it is somewhat more nuanced than being simply free to read. So let's take a look at what is an open access journal. So in 2023, OESPA and DOAJ got together and created the OA Journals Toolkit. So this document provides guidance for new and established open access journals to navigate that changing scholarly publishing landscape. And here, the definition of an open access journal is that it provides free and unrestricted access to its content with permissive reuse licenses to the published articles. So let's try to apply that. Let's start with what is not an open access journal, according to this guideline, right? So we start with traditional subscription journals, so are definitely not open. They're considered closed because readers or institutions have to pay for for access to the content. And then we have something called the bronze open access. And in this case, they are articles in a subscription journal that are free to read, but access can be taken away at any time, and the reuse rights for these articles are usually unclear. So you might encounter this when a subscription journal is promoting a special issue or a review article, let's say, in an email campaign. And that article may be free to read for 30 days or a few months, but it's ultimately still within that paywall content. So free access in this case doesn't make that article open access. True open access requires transparency, it requires permanence and user rights. So from there, we can move into the models that do meet that open access journal definition. And the most common is the APC-based gold open access, where the journal will make all the content openly available. The publishing costs are usually covered by an article processing or article publishing charge, and these charges may be paid by the authors, the funders, or institutions. And in some cases, the journals may offer waivers to support authors from under-resourced regions. And then we have Diamond Open Access, which is becoming increasingly important on the global stage. And some of the examples that Vincent mentioned from Latin America would come under this category. So let's dive a bit more into this. So what is Diamond Open Access? So the Diamas project from the EU, which is a consortium of organizations, they define Diamond Open Access Journal as being free for both authors and readers, and it is community owned. That is by a public or nonprofit organization. So effectively, these are community owned journals that see publishing as a shared public good rather than as a commercial product. And then we have some models that sit somewhere in the middle, right? So we have hybrid journals that are subscription based, but then they allow individual articles to be made open access if the author pays an APC. So they are not fully open, but individual articles can be published open access. And then we have green open access. And this is all about self-archiving. So authors can deposit the author's accepted manuscript in an institutional repository, which will then provide, more public access to that content, even if the journal itself the article has been published in is paywalled. And finally, I just want to share a few examples of some of the more innovative approaches that show some ways in which open access can be expanded more equitably. So one example is Subscribe to Open, or S2O, and this uses existing subscription revenue to make entire journal volumes open, but only if enough institutions participate through their subscriptions in any given year. Another interesting model is Scope 3, and that is a huge international partnership involving over 3,000 libraries, funders, and research centers, pooling together their resources to convert key physics journals or relevant articles in particle physics to open access, again, with no fees for the authors. And at PLOS, we are also actively exploring our own models to move us away from APCs. So we have two models here, our Community Action Publishing, or CAP model, that supports our highly selective journals. Here, institutions, again, collectively fund the publishing costs through a shared cost model, removing the APCs for authors, but this model also features a capped 10% profit margin for the journal. And another model we have is called the Global Equity Model. And this focuses on fairness across different economic contexts. The fees for this model are tiered based on an institution's publishing history and its World Bank income classification, which means that many institutions in low and middle income countries pay highly reduced fees or sometimes no fees at all. And before we move on, I want to touch on some of the challenges of these open access models. And the first major issue is that of financial sustainability. So in APC-based gold open access model, for example, these costs are shifting to authors and funders, and that creates a lot of pressure for those without, strong support. Diamond Open Access removes APCs and improves equity, but it also depends a lot on having stable community or institutional funding, and that's not always guaranteed. Equity and inclusion also remain as real concerns. APCs can widen global disparities, and the waiver programs that I mentioned can be also very inconsistent. At the same time, many regions lack the infrastructure that's needed to sustain diamond or community-run journals. Now, I think infrastructure and administrative burdens also add to all of this. Effective sharing of articles, of data, of code, and other outputs, they really require strong repositories, things like identifiers and metadata. And these are resources that some institutions may struggle with because managing deposits and compliance in institutional repositories often result in additional workload for a lot of libraries. And we also face business model tensions, right? The APCs can drive perverse incentives for commercial publishers to publish more and more articles. Transformative agreements involving the hybrid journals, they often require large-scale negotiations that smaller players, smaller publishers and journals struggle to join in. And collective models that I mentioned, like S2O, Scope 3, and PLOS's own institutional models, all of these rely heavily on broad participation to actually be stable. And also we see disciplinary differences as well. APC models tend to work better in well-funded STEM fields rather than in the humanities and social sciences, where the incentives and resources for open practices can be uneven. So ultimately, these issues will extend beyond open access, they also reflect some of the broader challenges that we face as a community in making open science work. So Fitri, with that, I'll hand over back to you.
Thank you so much, Elaine, and thank you for the presentations. I think participants and I also personally now understands like the now more aware on the models of open access and see the relevance in each of the models towards our region. And I think also you already like touched some of the challenges, and it's also fair to hear from the participants the challenges that they experience in everyday implementations of open science and also open access. So I would like to invite participants to join us in the Menti. Kasumi-san, please kindly share the Mentimeter. And before we go to the first questions, I would like to invite participants to answer the first questions on the country of origins. So sorry we ask these questions again because we would like to align the your country of origin and also your responses later. So please provide the information of your country for the first questions. Now you can see in the screen as well. Please scan the QR. We see now Indonesia is mostly the majority of our participants. Also, we can see from Australia, Afghanistan, Philippines, Thailand. I think I saw some comments from Timor-Leste. Republic of Korea, we also have them, Elaine. And Canada, of course, Fang Song, you are here, and hopefully we also have other participants from Canada. Yes, we are still waiting for your responses. For other participants, please also join us. At the moment, it's only 60-ish. Yes, we still have quite longer time for this session, so we will take time to go through each of the responses. Oh yeah, from Jeannie Barber, Indonesia, Australia. Yes, please join us in Mentimeter. You can scan the QR, or also colleague Inchu Kasumi, if you can help share the link in the chat so participants can join from the link as well.
I have already, yeah.
Thank you so much, Kasumi. And now we go to the second questions. Kasumi, please go ahead with the second question. Now we want to know what challenge do you face in practicing open science or open access in your field or institutions or country. You can give your response based on your own personal experience or your institutional experience or generally in your country. ABC is too high. ABC requirement, policy, cost, lack of national policy. Yes, I think it's the majority of challenges coming from most of the countries in our region. Yes, policy, recognitions. Some researchers are hesitant to share due to intellectual property concern. Yes. Data security. We also have some comments in the chat. Financial, okay. Oh, actually, also have one questions. Maybe we can keep these questions from Musrifah Idris. We will answer these questions at the end of the sessions. Hopefully, we will still have time. We'll keep these questions. And from the response, data sharing versus ethical and legal constraints, yes. Heavily rely on institutional subscriptions, too expensive for individual researchers. Yes, I agree. So, Just an idea and discussions, no implementations, yes, no real actions in the institutional levels. Perhaps, yes. Yes, we will still keep the Menti open, so please do not hesitate to still submit your responses. We will record that, and thank you so much for the responses because it's very important for us to identify these challenges and also perhaps bring more theme or topics for the next sessions for this webinar series. So please continue add your responses, and we will continue with the discussions. Thank you, Kasimi-san. You can still open the Menti, but please stop sharing. To build up from these challenges, Fong Song, I would like to address the second questions to you. Based on these challenges and also the challenges that mentioned by Elaine earlier, what do you think? What is the systemic changes are needed to address at least some of these challenges in implementing open science and open access?
So, in order to talk about the challenges, we cannot avoid the research evaluation question and the dependency that the research community developed related to publishing. Today, if you don't publish, you don't exist in the scientific community. And one could even say that in most places, if you don't publish in English, you don't exist. Because we've decided to give more value to that language. It was not always like that. Now we need to publish to show that we do something. Historically, we would publish when we discovered something. And it's interesting to contrast that with Peter Higgs, who is a well-known physicist who died not too long ago. Basically published his last paper, I think when he was 40. He published his last paper at a very young age because he considered that he did not have anything to add anymore. Like 1979, I'm done. I've contributed what I needed to science in terms of publishing. It doesn't mean that he was not doing research. It doesn't mean that he was not training students, but he had stopped publishing. So it's important because it reminds us that we don't win the Nobel Prize or cure cancer because we have published 2,000 papers or 200 papers. And the context of that, of course, is the growth in bibliometric evaluations and the increased focus that almost every country has on having faculty write papers. And this is a problem. I would argue, and it's going to sound perhaps a bit silly, that we are publishing too much. It doesn't mean that, I'm not saying that we're not doing too much research. I'm saying that we are publishing too much. And I just want to show you a very frightening curve on the total number of papers published every year. And basically, we are publishing more than the system can absorb. And by absorbing, I mean most researchers are unable to read everything in their field because there's too much being published. Most papers or most journals have a lot of difficulties finding reviewers. In the journal that I edit, I used to have to contact 4 people to get 2 reviewers. Now I need to contact 8 people to get 2 reviewers, and sometimes I'm at 25 people. So when you're at the 25th person, it's not your first choice. So the quality of the review will probably be low. And so this is a real challenge. And this is, I think, at the heart of the things that we need to address. And I want to add also the fact that the research production, okay, is increasingly high, but we're also seeing an increase in research productivity, which is numbers of papers per researcher. So scientists are increasingly productive, which in a way we can understand why, because we are pressured to publish, because there's new technologies that allow us to maybe do research faster. But it's as if we have new technologies, but the threshold to publish a finding did not become more difficult which is why some people are able to publish maybe 50 papers a year or something like that. So the system is publishing too much, and I think we need to really address that. So we need to go from the old era of open science that I mentioned in the first part into a new era of open science where, and I will lay a couple of the things we need to do. And so the first one is, of course, we need to expand the infrastructure for collective dissemination and moving towards diamond open access. Um, all of the challenges that Elaine mentioned are true. She is right. It's not easy to manage a diamond open access journals, but there's parts of the world that have been able to do it. Latin America is one. Indonesia seems to be one too. In Canada, we have our Diamond Open Access Journal platform that disseminates about 250 journals in the social sciences and humanities, mostly publishing in French. And so the point there is that some parts of the world have managed to do it, and most of these parts of the world are actually at the periphery because everything that was at the core, published in English, got purchased. Not everything, the vast majority got purchased by corporate publishers. So we need to show to the core that it's possible, and we need to find ways indeed for institutions and funders to support that. We need to work with Crossref to develop open metadata schemes. We need to have more and more free availability of data and on code that lead to databases. And there I will insist on one of those databases, which is the database to find science and to measure science. Because again, we have more and more of these journals and platforms that are nonprofit and that are at the periphery. But if you search through them using the Web of Science or Scopus, you will not find the papers, which is why this infrastructure also needs to include a platform, and we have one, and it's called OpenAlex, that allows us to be able to measure that, and so to be more inclusive and have international coverage. So we have a database that does that, and I just want to show one result that I think is very crucial because it shows how most nations are actually having more papers indexed in OpenAlex. And most of the nations that have more papers indexed in OpenAlex are nations that have good open access platforms. So the traditional bibliometric databases like Scopus and Web of Science, they index only English language, and they index quite often a higher proportion of closed papers. OpenAlex indexes more in a more inclusive manner and indexes, one could say, better. This is much closer to the actual production of countries. And so, of course, as I mentioned earlier, Indonesia increases a lot. China increases much less because it does publish a very, very high proportion of its papers in English. And they also have, as you probably all know, strong financial incentives to publish in English and have a strong focus on university rankings. I won't get into the details of university rankings, but they are also, from my point of view, a big part of the problem. It creates an homogeneity of research practices, and the homogeneity, of course, is not at the advantage of countries that are not from the that are not the US or European. These inclusive databases have much more papers written in languages other than English, but still, even in OpenAlex, English remains the dominant language. But if you look at all of the other languages, they go from basically being non-existent in the Web of Science to at least having some percentages of the papers. Indonesia is an interesting case. There's literally no papers in Indonesian in the Web of Science, and in OpenAlex, well, we're at 1% at least in the data that is throughout the period. If you take the most recent years, it's going to be much higher because of the exponential growth of the production from the country. I'll conclude on basically not toning down, but bringing some nuances to who controls scholarly publishing. In the first part of my talk, I said, yeah, most of the output is controlled by corporate publishers. It is true if you look only at the Web of Science or Scopus. But in reality, there's more and more science that is actually being published outside the corporate publishers. And this is from a paper we wrote last year. Actually, we published that in PLOS. So if you take the figure on the right, it shows that corporate publishers are actually taking more and more space. But that's only within the journals that are more prestigious and that have an impact factor. But if you take everything, all of the papers that are being published, actually more and more papers are published outside those platforms, outside the ownership of the big publisher. So in reality, it means that we have the journals now. We have the places to submit our work. And why are we not doing it? Well, it's because they don't have the same level of prestige. That's the only reason. It's not because they do a better job at making PDFs. It's just because of the prestige. So what do we need to do? What do policymakers need to do? They need to support collective infrastructure. My university spends 15 millions a year to pay for journals. Canadian universities altogether, it's probably 200 million, maybe more than that. There's money in the system that exists. It needs to be funneled for dissemination that is for common good. And these engagement need to be very strong. They need not to be they need not to be for only 1 year. If we want to change a scholarly communication system, we need to invest massively and give some reassurance to researchers that we will not change our mind in 2 years. We need to reform research assessment. I will not insist enough on that. And this is not only the responsibility of policymakers, it's the responsibility of everyone. Because who's making the peer review in most of the committee? It's other academics. So academics are their worst enemies. We really need to think that through. What is good science? What is a good journal? What are good markers of excellence? And in that context, what role do we have for indicators? Do we still count stuff, or we try to come up with a different system? And the last point I want to say, the policies that we're going to develop need to be coherent. Right now, open access policies are going into different directions. If we want scientists to follow actually that, there needs to be a strong and, let's say, simple signal to follow, not different types of signals. My colleagues who are in a rich university are not yet able to make the difference between a diamond journal and a gold journal. They all think that they cannot preprint because it's illegal. So again, there's massive work that needs to be done on developing coherent policies and also making sure that there's a good system to make sure that everyone understands that. So again, thank you very much and happy to discuss later.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Fang Song. It gives like lots of homework for all of us as well. So hopefully we can build from that. And Elaine, we learned from Vincent that research evaluations and metrics are one of the next steps to address the challenges. Now, I want to ask you, how can open practice in publishing and research sharing be observed and enabled better?
Thanks, Fitri. Okay, so I think, this I think is a key question for a lot of stakeholders in the research ecosystem today. So what is the state of open science? And I'm just wanted to reference this UNESCO report in 2023 that looked at the status and trends around the world. So this is from the UNESCO Open Science Outlook 1. And the headline here was that open science practices are increasing, but access to and participation in and the sharing of the benefits from open science were unevenly distributed worldwide. And from this chart on open access, you can see that in terms of open access publishing, we are seeing increases in gold and hybrid open access, even diamond open access as well. But then again, not so much in terms of green and bronze. And then you might ask, going beyond open access, what about other open science practices? So earlier I mentioned that at PLOS, our mission is to drive open science forward with meaningful and measurable change. But we can only succeed in doing so if we can understand the research communities that we serve, the current open science norms in those communities, as well as how open science behaviors may change over time, and especially in response to, new policies and offerings. So we wanted a clear and data-driven picture of how open practices were being adopted, not only across our journals, but also across the broader publishing landscape. So we had two goals here. One was to identify whether the approaches that we were taking were effective in fostering open science behaviors. And secondly, to try to build some evidence that these practices have real benefits. So that's why we developed the Open Science Indicators, or OSIs, because they help us see things like how often researchers share their data, share code, preprints, and so on across thousands of papers and over long periods of time. And we're not the only ones who need this information, right? Funders, institutions, policymakers, they are all trying to understand where they are now and are they making progress in terms of open science. So OSIs were a response for us to a gap that we were facing. And now with the standardized and scalable indicators, we can finally understand or get a better picture of how open science is evolving and how we might be able to help it grow. So these indicators have been produced in partnership with a company called DataSeer, and they use natural language processing and artificial intelligence to identify and measure open science practices across all PLOS articles, as well as in a comparator set of similar open access research articles in other journals. So in this next slide, it illustrates some of the information that you can get from the OSIs. On the left, you'll see two charts. The top left shows the percentage of data sharing across articles that contain data. And for PLOS articles, you can see that it's quite a high percentage. It's around 80%. However, on the bottom left, this chart shows that less than 35% of PLOS articles share data in a repository, and even less so for non-PLOS content. On the right-hand side, you can see that around 43% of articles that involve code share their code openly, and only around 20% of PLOS articles are sharing preprints. So the good news here is that, we can see that the general trend is increasing, but if the trend were to be stagnant, so what can we actually do about it? So I wanted to share this case study. In March 2021, one of our journals, PLOS Computational Biology, implemented a mandatory code sharing policy, which required authors to make all author-generated code and algorithms that underlie their findings available upon publication. And you can see that just before the implementation, the rates were hovering at around 60 to 70%. But after the implementation, within a year, they were over 85%. And by 2024, the code sharing rate for that journal was over 90%, and it's been maintained at that level since. So you can see that this policy has been very effective. And, we are currently also exploring which of our other journals might be suitable for us to have a similar policy. To give you another look at how we can use the OSI data to spot trends, we took a look at how different disciplines are using data repositories. Now, sharing data is valuable no matter how it's done. But if we really want that data to be accessible, to be discoverable and useful, we feel that repositories are the gold standard. So when we looked at PLOS articles, which is indicated in this chart by the blue bar, we saw that health sciences and biomedical and clinical sciences had the lowest rates of repository use. And, this probably has a lot to do with privacy concerns, which are a priority in those fields. But on the flip side, you can see that fields like information and computing sciences, psychology and biological sciences are really leading the way. Biological sciences in particular have a very high rate of adoption also in the comparator journal articles. And this suggests to us that there's a combination of disciplinary norms as well as data deposition mandates in these fields. So we've used our evidence and experience to help inform and shape broader policy as well. For example, a few years ago, PLOS participated in a UKRI workshop to help develop an updated data sharing policy in the UK. And one key area we raised was how many researchers are still relying on supplementary information to share their data. And what we recommended in that instance was clearer guidance on mandating repository use to make that data more accessible and reusable. Another question that many researchers, institutions, and funders may also ask is, does openness actually make a difference? Does sharing their data, sharing their code, posting preprints, or even publishing open access translate into real benefits for researchers or for society? And here, this was the second reason why we felt we needed the OSIs, to be able to understand the effects and hopefully to demonstrate the benefits of open science with evidence. Now, to explore this question, we worked with Giovanni Colavizza from the University of Copenhagen, and using OSI data, as well as the French Open Science Monitor, they analyzed whether open outputs were linked to a citation advantage. So this analysis looked at a huge data set, over 500,000 scientific articles, and examined whether open practices were linked to increases in citations. And across the board, we could see that every open practice was linked to a measurable uplift. So articles that were published open access on average were linked to an 8% increase in citations. When researchers shared their source code, the citation boost jumped to 13%. Sharing data was linked to an even higher increase, about 14%. And preprints showed the strongest effect. The articles that were first posted as a preprint were linked to a 19% increase in citations. So the message from this study was very clear. Openness isn't only good for transparency or reproducibility. It also amplified the reach and the impact of the work, because when the research is more visible and more reusable, I think it naturally travels a bit further and gets cited more. And that, I think, is incredibly valuable information for researchers, for institutions and funders who are trying to maximize the value of their outputs. And what's rather powerful about this kind of monitoring is that we can take it a step further to see not just whether open practices are increasing or not increasing, but where and how and which communities this is happening in, because some fields may accelerate more quickly and others may face more friction in their approach. Because even as we see open science practices growing, the fact is that researchers are still facing very real barriers. So this paper that was published in 2022 surveyed early career researchers across the globe to try to find out what types of barriers they face. And in general, the most frequently discussed barriers included a lack of awareness and training around open science practices, the high time commitments needed, as well as restrictions or lack of incentives from their supervisors. This is another image that was taken from the same paper. And here I just wanted to highlight some of the barriers that were mentioned in relation to the publication process. And these included the time and funding limitations, the lack of incentives, the questions around who benefits from the open sharing of their work. So these are all, very valid concerns. So how might indicators like the OSIs help to address these challenges? Well, I think the OSIs can give us a way to track real researcher behavior and allow us to see where open practices are taking hold, and where they might be lagging. They can help to provide the evidence base needed for funders and institutions, and publishers as well, to design better support systems, improve the guidance, and target capacity building where it might be most needed. So while open practices can bring measurable benefits, the adoption varies across different communities and real barriers exist. But with the right indicators in place, we can try to find those, targeted solutions to address barriers and help open science progress in a way that's more equitable, sustainable, and evidence-driven. So I'm just going to end here with a quote from Audrey Azoulay's foreword that was in the Open Science Outlook from UNESCO, which I thought was very suitable for this today's webinar. And she says, to drive this momentum, we now need not only to fully review progress in open science around the world, but also to clearly show the positive changes it can lead to for sustainable development, the reduction of inequalities between regions, and the advancement of scientific knowledge. And with that, Fitri, I'm going to end here.
Thank you so much, Elaine. We can see, and I agree with you when you say the openness can reach more audience, and also the papers can get cited more. That's really give us the new perspectives to participants and contributes to open access and open science. And because we have 15 minutes in our time for this webinar. So I would like to, if both of you agree with this, I would like to pick up some questions from the chat. We have two questions that have not been responded in the chat box. One is from Musrifah Idris, with questions: under what category is this open science publications indexing rank? I think this can be addressed to Elaine. And the second questions from Lucia Gomez from Timor-Leste. I think both of you can answer this questions if you want to give your views. What about articles that are published without peer review? Maybe first one, Elaine, if you can respond to the first questions.
So under what category is this open science publication indexing rank? I wonder if Mushrifah Idris, could you provide a bit more context to this? Because I'm not sure I fully understand the question. What category do you mean? Yeah.
I think it's probably the questions related to the model that you explained earlier. I think the questions come up during that presentation. Or Musrifah, if you want to take the floor to explain more about your questions.
So maybe more generally, and Mushrifah, you can tell me if I'm completely off here. The open science publications, generally, if you're talking about being indexed in databases, most of them will be indexed in the same databases like Web of Science, or OpenAlex, like Vincent mentioned, Scopus. A lot of them will be in those similar databases alongside any traditional journals. Is that what you were asking?
we don't get more response from her. So let's move on to the second questions from Lucia Gomez. I think both of you can respond to this. What about the papers that not true peer-reviewed?
Well, it depends. Again, if we're talking about preprints, though those indeed are not yet reviewed, but what we're increasingly seeing is that they are cited. Again, because we need to also rethink how peer review is made. Right now, as I mentioned earlier, it's a huge burden on scientists. I do believe we need some form of peer review, but we probably need to rethink the way it's made. Keep in mind that the current form that we're seeing of peer review is a relatively new innovation in the scientific system. It's something that came up. Well, there were always committees on papers, but that form is relatively recent. So I think we need to rethink that. A database like OpenAlex will have papers that are being reviewed. We'll also have preprints. We'll also have actually many different types of documents. So again, the the question is very general. I'm trying to give in some some answers, but those right now in the scientific system are increasingly used. Preprints are increasingly part of the standard literature that people will read and cite.
Elaine, you want to add on
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, so I think preprints are really interesting and PLOS really, we support and in fact we encourage and try to facilitate people to post their preprints alongside their, even as they submit their articles to us. I think that this is again another evolving area that people are looking at because as Vincent mentioned, there are a lot of benefits to sharing your preprints. There are a lot of, I think, preprint servers and databases that are very well established, whether they are community-based ones like Archive for physics, for example, um, or things like bioRxiv, where you can submit your preprint, and then that gets, also posted to a journal like PLOS for consideration. The preprint servers allow comments. So in fact, a lot of these established communities that are familiar with preprints, they get a lot of very useful comments from their peers. So in a way, it's a form of peer review from the community as well. And sometimes there are some models that is being looked at in scholarly publishing where those comments from those open comments in the preprint kind of servers get kind of imported into the peer review process at for the journals as well, so that all of that is being taken into consideration. So I think with preprints, there are, I think, it's another way of getting community feedback as well. So and also those articles, I think when they are finally published and they have gone through the peer review process, the preprint itself, you can post a link to the final article so that people can see the kind of evolution of this part of that publishing process. So there's a lot of things going on, but it's an interesting evolving space.
Thank you so much, Elaine. And we note that several questions and also comments on institutional infrastructures to develop, how to develop institutional infrastructures. There is a questions on is downloading publications from internet and store them in repository is a solutions, or and also questions how to overcome the institutional challenges. And this will be for sure this will be discussed in future webinars, but I would like to also invite Fang Song and also Elaine if you have any comments or views on this.
Well, I'm looking at all of at all of the questions. So of course, an institutional repository is something that I think is essential for a university. There are, I think, repository solutions that are not as demanding, uh, either financially or technologically. Um, I think it's important for a university to have an archive of everything that faculty in that university have published. So there's definitely, I think, a strong importance for that. And quickly, I want to answer also the question by Pragya on citations to preprint. So right now, in most databases, the preprint and the published paper will be considered as two different documents. And that's the case in OpenAlex among others, which means that it's going to count if the preprint is cited, then it's going to go as a citation to the preprint. If the paper is cited, then it's going to go as a citation to the paper, which means that it kind of splits citations, but all of the citations are received by the same group of people because it's theoretically the same authors in the publication or the preprint. So that's not really, from my point of view, it's not really an issue. Um, we do know, though, that many scholars will actually read the preprint but cite the published version. If it's published in between when they receive the proof, then they would make the modification and cite the published version. So it's not so much an issue, I think.
And do you have any inputs or views on these issues?
I think maybe there was a question around whether you can download publications from other people's research results from the internet and store them in the repository. So I think there's maybe two ways to think about this. Like, is it an institutional repository? And if so, if it's your institutional repository, then I guess perhaps is the institutional repository wanting to kind of store papers from the institution itself. I think that's a question whether, it's within the scope of what you're doing. The other, I think, question to ask is what are the the license and the rights of that research publication that you want to download, right, and store. So if it's an open access, depending on the different types of license, you that might be something you could do, I think, and that's something that you need to explore on a paper by paper level. But the other thing I wanted to mention here is that I think Fitri, you mentioned you might be looking into more infrastructure issues. And I think that, around coalescing around the UNESCO Open Science recommendation, there are a lot of, countries and organizations looking at how the infrastructure can try to bring more of these contents together so that you, your institutional repositories might be more visible to other people doing a search, for example. So hopefully it's not something that you need to think of in the future because you might have access to things that sit in other repositories or other databases once we get this open infrastructure, and interconnected infrastructure going in the open science ecosystem.
Thank you so much, Fang Song, and also Elaine. I see there are a lot of questions, but I think we cannot answer all of them in this session. So we invite you participants to attend the next webinars that we will have starting next month for the fourth sessions to discuss more about, for example, the infrastructures, the institutional infrastructures. And thank you so much, Elaine, for your explanation, also Fang Song for your presentations. We learned so much from today's sessions, and also participants for your engagement and your response in our Mentimeter. There are so many meaningful inputs to our future webinars. And you can see now, please bookmark the page. This is our project page when you can find the invitations or the registrations link for the next webinars, the fourth webinars that will be organized on 26th February, the same time, Jakarta time, and we will share the detailed letters about the topics, about the speakers, and we also want to invite you to tell us what do you need to know about open science, maybe other aspects that you want to know more, so we can consider that as the topics, or we will discuss this in the next webinars. And if you know anyone who can contribute to these discussions, please also let us know. If you want to also contribute in any of our topics, please also send us emails through pcb.jakarta@unesco.org. And the last one, if you also want to evaluate this webinars and also how we do this series, please send us a message. For sure, all of our questions today will be recorded, and we will put the summaries together in our websites. Please bookmark the project page. And thank you so much once again to Fang Song and so Elaine for your time, and also for all participants for your time today. And with this, I will conclude the webinars, and have a good day. Bye-bye.